just because I don't want to edit everyone for joining us so promptly. We are definitely ready to get started. But before we begin, I'd love if you could join with me in an acknowledgement to country. So on behalf of Sarah, Gabby, Matt, Tom, and everyone on the Halad team here with us today, in the spirit of recognising reconciliation, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we work and live, and that is for us here in Melbourne, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I acknowledge their connection to the land, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Thank you so much for joining us for that acknowledgement of country, and something that we think is really important to continue to do. Sarah, if we could start pressing record, so for everyone who is unable to attend, terrific. So today we are going to do our Life of an MD student event hosted by Halad. If you have not been to a Halad event before or heard of us, we're essentially a non-for-profit here in Australia where we run the most affordable GAMSAT and med interview tuition services to help students, but also all those tuition fees goes towards providing a free health to our partner community in rural Philippines. And it's terrific because all of the MD students we have talking to us and sharing about their journey here today have actually been on that volunteering experience and been to our partner community in rural Philippines and been the ones who have actually taught our students there. So for that, I am forever grateful. And so for the 4 students that we have today, we were meant to have 5, but unfortunately all the MD students at University of Sydney have an assessment tonight, so that was not possible. But we'll start off with, we have the terrific Sarah, who is an MD3 student at Monash University, which I know a lot of students are from here today. And Sarah is... I'd like to now start off with what they are known for. And Sarah is known for actually being our absolute Zoom and tech whiz, which I think a lot of people don't really know. But she's also been on the first ever volunteering trip with us at Halad. And before we go on, Sarah, if you could unmute yourself and tell us, if you could describe yourself in one word when you were applying to med, and then one word now.
Yeah, I think the word that I think of before medical school is perfectionistic. And now the word I think of is growth. Yeah, those are my 2 words.
Okay, I think it's context, but sure. And our
next... said one word.
Sure. And then our next MD student we have today is Gabby, who is an MD1 student at the University of Melbourne, which is really exciting. And for all the students who obviously are MD1 this year, their experience is obviously very different because they are all attending Zoom university instead of, you know, what a normal university year would look like, but they've all been so resilient to come through. Gabby in particular, and as if anyone has come through our GAMSAT services would know that Gabby and Sarah are very much 2 of the 4 tutors who are the backbone of our Section 1-2 GAMSAT tutoring service, and also an incredible MMI examiner as well. So Gabs, what's your one word for before and after?
I was going to not say this, but I'm going to say it because I can't think of anything else, but stressed prior to getting into med and still stressed in med. So
things don't change.
Stress. Yeah.
Terrific. And next up we have Tom, who is our MD1 student at Notre, which is up in Sydney. And Tom is also our legals director here at Halad, and also went on the first ever volunteering trip with us. Now, Tom, what is your before and after?
I don't know if I've got a good word for before. Yeah, I suppose focused, and then I think now stressed is, I agree with Gary, stressed is a pretty good call. Yeah.
So it gets worse apparently. Cool. And last but not least, to round off 404, we have Matt Conn, who also came on our second volunteering trip at Halad and is an avid surfer, and is an MD1 student over at Deakin. So what is your before and after word?
When I was trying to get into medicine, I would say busy was my word to describe me. And then now, balanced.
Nice.
Or better balanced. Not completely
Nice.
balanced.
Terrific. Awesome. Well, thank you all four of you guys for joining us tonight. The way we're going to structure this is we're going to try and do something at Halad, which we have not previously done very well before, and that's finish on time. So we've structured today out to have 5 specific sections, and that is 1, to go through each university's curriculum and how they're different and whatnot. 2, the rural opportunities that exist. 3, the extracurricular opportunities that exist. 4, shining some perspective now that they're in med school. And 5, just offering some advice for students who, I'm assuming everyone here wants to get into medicine just at some stage. So before all of that, also, if you have any questions as we move through those sections, please ask them in the chat below and I'll answer them whilst we're in that block. Otherwise, we'll just end up moving on. But first of all, let's go to Sarah. Can you just start off with, so you're from Monash, tell me a bit about your journey from going undergrad, whatever you were doing, to now being in postgrad med.
Yeah, so my journey to med started even before I began my undergrad. So I finished high school and then went into biomed at Monash. And the reason why I chose biomed at Monash was that I knew there was a med admissions pathway that I could potentially go through, but I also knew it was really competitive. So in my second year of biomed, I sat the GAMSAT, and then I did really well on it. And so I was really happy with that. And actually at the time, Monash worked a little bit different. So I was really lucky because I got given my med offer at the end of second year of biomed. So I already knew that I was in med before I even finished my degree. So that was really fortunate, and unfortunately I don't do that anymore. But then the next year, I still decided to apply for UniMelb. I think part of me just wanted to use my GAMSAT score, to be completely honest, and I just wasn't entirely sure yet which one I would choose if I got into both, which I did. And so then I had to work out which one I wanted to choose. And so that took a bit of time. It took time to explore like all the reasons why people go to different unis, and the things that are different between the curriculums, the things that I wanted and my goals in medicine, and just some of the other opportunities. One of the things that led me to Monash was that they have a flipped learning classroom model, which, will we talk about curriculum in a bit, or is that what I'm covering now?
Let's talk about that in curriculum.
About it now?
In curriculum, which is
cool.
now.
I wasn't sure if that was okay. Sorry guys, you can tell I'm very on top of what we're talking about. Yes, so I really liked the curriculum. I'll tell you more about that later. And I also loved the opportunities that were available for research. My undergrad made me very passionate about public health, and Monash Med also had a lot of opportunities there. And I just loved the environment of Monash Med. In first year postgrad, we all live out rural in Gippsland together, and I really loved that idea of everyone living out there. And I'll tell you a bit more about how the curriculum works soon with that, but I just loved that style, and I thought that learning style worked for me. So that's why I chose Monash over Melbourne, essentially. I think that becomes a bit of $1 million question when I tell people about my med journey. So that's why. There's no better or worse, but that's what I chose, and that's where I am now in my third year of Monash Med.
Cool, terrific. And just an extension of that, Sarah, how did you end up objectively going academically, GAMSAT score-wise, and just extracurricularly to contribute to your portfolio or whatever?
Yeah. So biomed was years ago now, so I don't really remember exactly how I went, but my WEM I know was around in the high 80s, so it wasn't crazy high. I know that can sound quite high, but I think it equated to a GPA just under a 7. It was like a 6.9 something. But yeah, I don't think the numbers are overly important, but I know people like to know them. So those were more of my undergrad scores. And then my GAMSAT score was in the top 1%, I think, and that year, and it was a 78.
Okay, cool stuff. Awesome. Gabs, same question. Journey from undergrad to post.
Yes. So I actually didn't apply for med or even sit the UMAT in year 12, just because in the circumstances that I was in at the time, I never thought that I would get in. So I thought, what's the point? And what's the point in spending so much money to travel to go and sit the UMAT, because it wasn't available in the town that I was in. And I didn't want to sort of like ask for that and then sit it and then not get in, which I'm sure lots of people would probably feel the same. So I just did biomed because I thought maybe I could get a job that's sort of similar to being a doctor. And then I moved to Melbourne, and my first year biomed was horrific. I definitely did not cope with the whole transition from high school to uni. And I actually did really poorly in all of my subjects in first year. So I spent the entirety of biomed trying to pick up my WAM from first year, which was such a hard task, especially with as you progress through biomed. I feel like subjects get harder, so it's harder to get a better mark. And then so I was constantly sort of trying to pick that up. But I think in my strengths for applying for medicine was that extracurricular side of me. I was always busy doing other things and volunteering, which I think stood out for a lot of portfolio unis especially, as well as things like coming from a rural background, particularly, I think, sort of work in your favour in the application process, as well as in GAMSAT, like writing an essay. I linked it to rural health, which I think probably sort of helped me get a good mark there as well as in the interview process as well. I think having that sort of background and extracurricular activities, I was able to go quite well in the interviews, I think. And I ended up interviewing at Monash, Melbourne, and USyd. And I didn't want to go to USyd because it was quite far away from my family. That was the main thing. And I didn't want to get accommodation in Sydney because it's hella spenny. So that was one thing. I definitely didn't want to go to Sydney. Nothing against the uni, just the city. And then I wanted... We don't have any USyd people here to defend it, sorry. Oh, it's okay. Tom might say he likes Sydney. And then picking between Melbourne and Monash was a little bit more tricky, I think. And I was tossing up between right until the end. And then same sort of thought process as Sarah, actually, just breaking it down to what the curriculum could offer me, where I think I could do best in what course, as well as the opportunities for research and public health as well as the rural placement opportunities, which I'm sure we'll get into, as well as the opportunity for me to stay in Melbourne for first year so I could work and save money for the following years, which has worked out very well with COVID, but also, changed things a little bit, but that's okay.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Gab. And now over to Tom, who obviously has made the jump across the border up to Sydney from Melbourne. If you haven't been able to notice the motif yet, we all did come from Monash's biomed. That's how we all know each other. But yes, how did you go from your undergrad to your postgrad in Notre Dame, Tom?
So like everyone else, I started biomed at Monash. And that's obviously where I got involved in Halad, which wasn't really called Halad at the start. It was just kind of basically a few of us with a pretty random idea, and then we went over to the Philippines, but now it's come a long way. And so I did biomed at Monash, but I think I mainly focused on, I put a big emphasis on like Gabby, the extracurricular sort of stuff. I preferred doing a lot of art subjects. So I found myself doing politics, and I ended up doing a minor in history. So I really enjoyed that kind of like different side of the degree. And I think that's a good thing maybe about biomed at Monash, is you do get a lot of opportunities to do breadth subjects. So I'd really encourage you, if you've been thinking about wanting to get into med, I'd encourage everyone to kind of do stuff which also isn't necessarily related to med, because at the end of the day, it's not a prerequisite to do just solely phys or just solely biochemistry or something the like. So then I finished at the end of last year, although technically I'm still waiting to graduate, like Gabby, where we're just kind of, I think our graduation's been put off and off and off. And so I started at Notre Dame at the start of the year. And so being a portfolio university, they really value things like, they value things like showing that you've a bit more of you've got broad interests, and you've got a bunch of different interests. And so I think that's reflected in the cohort. We've got a really kind of interesting cohort, and everyone's done some incredible things. And I've really loved the move to Sydney. It's been fantastic. A lot of really great opportunities. I really enjoy the uni. So I would highly recommend it to anyone who's thinking of that. And so I suppose my message would be just there from undergrad to postgrad would be, don't be afraid to do things not necessarily directly related to med. And yes, and Nanya, I did interview at Notre Dame. That is where I interviewed.
Terrific. Look at Tom, always on the inspo motivation. He definitely is that. Just like such a reflection of him as a person. Next up, we have Matt, who jumped all the way from metropolitan Melbourne over to Geelong to hit the waves at Deakin in over there. So if you could go through your journey from how you went from undergrad to where you are now.
Yep. So like all of these guys, I started Monash Biomed the year after I finished school. I always enjoyed doing things that weren't uni in my uni degree, so that didn't fare too well for me in first year. I ended up taking a year off after my first year of Monash Biomed to go and do some other things. I went away, travelled overseas for about half the year, did some volunteering and just some backpacking away, which was, I think, something that was really good for me in the end. I then came back and did second and third year, and I've finished third year last year with some of these guys, and I've started at Deakin this year in late January. So in terms of how academically I went, I sort of started pretty slow in first year, socialising more than studying, which I don't regret, but I definitely had to work harder in second and third year when I came back to uni. Extracurricularly tried to sort of throw myself into making friends, playing sport, and just, doing a little bit of volunteering around uni as well, trying to keep a bit of balance in my life that sort of ended up petering out a little bit towards the pointy end of things of biomed. I did the GAMSAT in the end of my second year. So I did a September GAMSAT and then I did a March GAMSAT back to back. Sort of pushed it from low 60s in my first to higher 60s in my second. My WAM ended up being okay. I think it was sort of low 80s, like quite low 80s. And I ended up interviewing at Monash and at Deakin. The interviews are about 7 days apart, so that was a fun time in Matt's life. In terms of what pushed me towards Deakin, really like the course structure, which I guess we're going to talk about next, and also the way sort of Deakin does their intake is not, I don't know if it's unique, but it's a little bit different to some of the other unis, and also the chance I'm living in Torquay now, which is really, really nice. So the lifestyle sort of drew me down this way as well.
Terrific. Thanks so much, guys. I'm going to leave Radhika's question about how Gabby got offers until the next part on perspective.
Religion. I didn't have any questions about religion or anything to do with that being Catholic in my interview at Notre Dame. And Notre Dame make it really clear if you go on their website and have a read about their med kind of application process. They make it really clear that whilst they are a Catholic university, anyone can go to the university, and it's not about being Catholic. It's not about it's just, I think, the ethos of the university. And so what they simply say is that a lot of their values come from a position of of the Catholic faith. So that's something that they're completely transparent and open about. But I know there are people in my course who are Muslim, there are people who are agnostic, there are people who are atheist. It's really not, it's not a prerequisite in any way. It's just simply a characteristic of the uni, as if some unis have a focus on rural health, things like that. I think that Notre Dame simply states that it is inherently a Catholic uni. But as for any questions, I didn't know any of my friends either who had questions about it in the interview. So I can try find some more information about that and get back to you if that helps.
Cool stuff. I'm so sorry. Thanks so much for saving the day, Tom. And we'll go in order back to, just so like no curveballs, it's definitely always going to go Sarah, Gabby, Tom, Matt, and we'll start off with Sarah and then the Monash sort of med curriculum. If you can sort of give us a go through of how you would describe the curriculum between years 1, 2, 3, what and the relevant, whether how much clinical, how much coursework there is, how much extra kind of stuff there is. Table is yours.
Yes, okay. So I'll split it up a bit into pre-clin and clinical years, and then more extracurricular stuff we'll do in extracurriculars. So for Monash, I guess, like I mentioned, the curriculum was a huge selling point for me. The reason why is because Monash postgrad follows a flipped classroom model. So we actually never had a lecture. So I don't like lectures. I don't like sitting in lectures and I don't learn from them. And so instead you just did a module prior to class, and then there were no lecture theatres. It was just this big med facility. And I think I took a picture so that I could show you all, but I actually don't know if I have the picture. Oh, this is a less great picture of it. All right, Liz, I'm going to really quickly share this picture while I explain. Very cute picture of me and my med friends. But more importantly, what I loved was we had these hospital wards. So instead of lecture theatres and classrooms where we would practice everything. And that was first year pre-clin. So this is us just hanging out. Sometimes we would also sleep the night there. Wouldn't recommend that because it was very tiring. But what I loved about the curriculum was that every day it was clinical learning and practice. And we did have lessons where it was a little bit more didactic, but never in lecture theatres, always in small groups. That just suited me so well because I'm more of an independent learner. The only thing was, and I know that there was a question in the chat about presumed knowledge. So Monash Med is a little bit different in that they only take people who've done specific undergrad courses at Monash. So they take, if you've done physio, science, nursing, or biomed. And so because of that, there was very high level of presumed knowledge and you did have to keep up. And I know that people who came from biomed background went really well, but those who came from a science background, if they hadn't done particular subjects, struggled a little bit at the start. But by the end of the year, everyone helps each other and everyone caught up. But the curriculum for pre-clin was very interactive, which I loved. Now in clinical years, a typical day in COVID at the moment is a little bit different, but outside of COVID, and lucky for me, sometimes I still get to go into placement at the moment, but a typical day will be that you turn up to the hospital at either 7 or 8 a.m, depending on the rotation you're on. You meet with the team for ward round, which goes for a few hours, or if you're on surgical, then you'll scrub in and go into the surgery and get to talk to the patient beforehand, do the pre-surg checks, pre-op things, speak with the anaesthetist, help anaesthetize. So you can really get on board with all of the clinical experience, which I loved. Or on your rotations, you can also go into clinic and go into sort of more outpatient care and look at how that happens, or even imaging. So what I really liked about the curriculum was you could try everything. And my year this year, I have something like 12 rotations, and each rotation sort of feeds into the next one, so I can try lots of specialties as well. And that's why I chose Monash. Yeah.
Awesome. And speaking to the title of sort of this event and what it's all about.
Pharmacy. Sorry.
Can you just describe what maybe a day in the life of your med journey looks like?
Like currently in clinical years? Actually, I might do that because I'm sure the others can speak plenty about how much study there is in pre-clin. So clinical years of medicine is a little bit different. There's much less study that you have to do, still definitely a lot to learn, but you essentially are learning on the wards and learning on the job, which I love. And so most of the time I can go into the hospital or into rotation, and I spend the day on the ward learning, asking questions, and then when I come home I can do my own thing and have my own time to do other things. So that's quite different to when you're learning all of the base knowledge prior to clinical years. So a typical day is me waking up really early, driving into the hospital, meeting up with the team. If you're lucky, after ward round they'll buy you coffee, and then afterwards going in and seeing your patients. So you might want to see some patients after ward round, or you might have a lecture. It just really depends on what rotation you're on and what you want to learn. My advice to people is always get to know people on the ward and on your team, because then you can get more opportunities. So you can give them your name and be like, if anything cool comes up, can you call me? And they'll call you and let you come. So it's really varied. It's really hard to say what a day in the life is like, but it's basically just exploring the world of being a doctor. And the thing that I get told over and over again at the moment is that my key pass for my hospital that I'm at is the most unrestricted one out of anyone who works there. Students literally get to see so much, and we're so lucky. So yes, I love clinical years of med, and they're definitely worth sticking out the really stressful pre-clin years. Yeah.
Look at Gabby's eyes boil up when she says free coffee is available.
Sometimes lunch too.
Gabs, what was Uni Melb's curriculum like? Obviously you're in preclinical times, but I guess overall.
Yeah, I think from what I've read, Melbourne Uni have actually made quite a few changes to their curriculum in the recent years. But what the plan was for 2020 was this very much clinical focused learning, even in first preclinical year. So every Thursday, first year med students had placement. Every fortnight you'd get GP all day, and then the next week you'd get hospital all day. And they were all metro hospitals as well. So even students that were placed rurally in older years were still in metro on those weeks, because obviously you don't want to drive all the way to rural for one day and then come back. So that's what the curriculum was supposed to be. And it's very much focused on clinical skills as well. But obviously things have changed a little bit this year. There's still, and I will talk to the online learning part of things, because I think it's probably going to be relevant for students who do it next year. But hopefully you guys will still get a bit of placement every Thursday like was planned. But a lot of it now is all online. We do have a lot of lectures. Unlike Monash, there is definitely a downside in my opinion, but some people do learn well off of lectures. We also have lots of online learning, sort of interactive module type things as well. And online labs, which have been a learning curve for the university, I think, but they are getting better, which is really good. I think with each week they bring out something new. But basically it's very much focused on pathology as well. There's a large focus on pathology, histology, pathological processes, that sort of thing, which I think is a bit different when I talk to my friends who do go to other universities. We perhaps have a bit more of a focus on that pathology side of things. So if that's something that you're interested in, definitely good. One part of the first year course that I really loved is First Nations health is a big topic in first year. It's incorporated throughout the entire year. We have assessments on it, as well as lecturers, tutorials, everything like that. So I find that really, really great as part of the course. And the main sort of tutorial that we have each week is we have this case-based learning, where we have a case at the beginning of the week in a small group of 10 to 12 students, sort of unpack the case a little bit, come up with a few differential diagnosis, do up big sort of mind maps as to how the disease progresses and how the disease could have occurred in this patient, and then find out more information throughout the week, and then come back on Friday and sort of finalize that case, which I think that case-based learning is really great for your learning because it sort of reinforces all of those lectures. So if you're more of an active learner and don't work well with lectures, that sort of case-based learning really does help there. So that's for first year. And then I did look up a couple of things for the other years, just in case people wanted to know. And both year 2 and 3 are pretty similar, with clinical years, which are based at the GP and hospital. And then year 4 is a bit different at Melbourne Uni compared to other unis, I think, because we have a research project, which is one of the main reasons why I chose Melbourne Uni, because I think it's a really awesome aspect to the course. So if research is something that you want to do and something that you want integrated into your degree without having to sort of go that extra mile to try and figure out how to get that opportunity, which is something that I definitely felt like I was inept to do that myself. So I really liked the idea of having it integrated into our course. So that's 4th year. And in terms of expectations, they tell us in first year to block out 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday for uni, and to not work more than 7 hours elsewhere. But I do work more than 7 hours elsewhere, and it's fine. Yeah, a lot more. It's fine.
Awesome. And also to Tom, I know you always are head down in your med school books. How has the curriculum been for you in Notre Dame?
Okay, so from the sounds of it, it's there are a lot of similar elements to kind of what Gabby was talking about. So we've obviously the MD project for us is a big thing in 3rd year and 4th year. So that's a big emphasis as to where people are putting their time. The way Notre Dame works is that you have your first 2 years are mainly preclinical, and then your second 2 years are mainly clinical. So there are a whole host of clinical schools that you can go to, from Sydney and like St Vincent's in the city in Sydney to Wagga Wagga, to a bunch of rural locations around New South Wales. And then also you can go to Ballarat and Melbourne Clinical School, which includes Werribee, some of the Western hospitals, and St Vincent's Melbourne as part of the clinical school. So you've got a bunch of options there, and it's pretty cool because there are so many different kind of ways that you can pick and choose where you're going to go. So we were told a very similar thing. It's a full-time job, we've been told, and to not work more than 7 hours. At a very similar spiel. So I think that's, regardless of where you go, Matt will probably say the same, is that it's I think you're looking at a very big commitment, but obviously you wouldn't be here if that's not something that you were looking forward to. So I think the curriculum at Notre Dame is a little bit different. We follow the same. There are a few universities, a few med schools who share the same curriculum model, including University of Queensland, and I think University of Western Australia are also moving to a thing called a spiral model. And it's basically where you go around every week, and it's a new kind of way to do a med degree. But it's something that I found really different at first, and something that was quite confusing, trying to wrap my head around how to organise my study compared to biomed. But it's something that starts to really pay dividends. I was at the GP the other day on my placement, because we've been lucky enough in Sydney that we're not locked down, which is fortunate, but provided cases stay low. But it was really cool to see how already the way that the spiral model sort of thing works plays into your practical application of knowledge. When pretty much every patient who presented that day, you could put some sort of idea behind what was going on, which I thought was pretty cool. So yeah, I think Notre Dame's a really great choice if you're thinking about maybe experiencing New South Wales, because the first 2 years preclinical you're going to be in Sydney, and then from there the 3rd and 4th years there's a bunch of different options. There's a big emphasis on rural clinical schools. Notre Dame have a bunch of schools from Ballarat to Lithgow to Wagga Wagga, and a few other options. So yeah, if you've got any more specific questions, I'll pass it over to Matt. If you've got any more specific questions, feel free to ask me.
So sounds like from what these guys have said, there's a bit that's similar with Deakin, and there's a bit that's different. So Deakin, we're the same as Notre Dame. We have 2 preclinical years and 2 clinical years. So you're at uni for the first 2 years. And then in your clinical school for the second 2 years. I'll get to the clinical school bit. So for preclinical, the way Deakin operates, and this is sort of answering one of the questions from earlier in terms of assumed knowledge. So there's actually 0 prerequisites to get into Deakin, into the medical school. So you're not actually expected to know anything at all, which is interesting. And the way that they sort of do their intake, which I mentioned before, is they give a lot of bonuses out to people who've done other things. So people that are coming from other full-time careers, from allied health like backgrounds, from rural backgrounds, from Indigenous backgrounds. So they try and really draw in, and some like international students as well. They try and really draw in like a very diverse cohort, which I've noticed. It's quite obvious once you come into the uni, and it's really like has been really fun, and just end up with a really cool group of interesting people. In terms of the curriculum, it's designed so that people who have a lot on their plate already, because they're trying to draw in students who are from our age to like quite a bit older, so people that have families, kids, full-time jobs. So in terms of working around the course, it's actually probably like it is quite possible to work quite a bit, because of the way they've spread the information out over 2 years rather than sort of squishing it into one preclinical year. And so I guess that is something that's quite possible. Like classes at the moment, we're doing 4 days a week. On our 5th day, we would usually have a placement. Like we don't have them every week, once every couple of weeks. But obviously that's not happening at the moment. So our classes are probably between, like compulsory wise, like 2 to 3 hours a day, with lectures around that you can sort of just watch whenever you want, because they're uploading them all at the start of the week now with good old COVID. So quite a flexible course, quite a lot of time for me to surf and procrastinate, which is good and bad. In terms of the clinical schools that you can go into, there's quite a big clinical school at Geelong. That's the main one. Probably about 60 plus kids will go there from each year level. And then they have about 20 to 30 in Warrnambool and Ballarat. And then less than 20 in a Melbourne clinical school. So most of the people that will go to that clinical school have a genuine reason to be in Melbourne, like jobs, families, that kind of thing. And then there's an extended there's a rural cohort, which will do a year quite rurally and then come back into a clinical school of their choice for their 4th year. So that's kind of the structure of our course. We also do a similar thing to what Gabby was mentioning. We call it problem-based learning rather than team case-based learning. So like you have a class on a Monday, introduce a case, all of your lectures, labs, and clinical skills are relevant to that sort of like field and case, and then you will bring it together on Friday. So it's the first thing you do on a Monday and the last thing you do on a Friday, which is I've found is a really cool way of sort of integrating your learning to actually like a real patient. So yeah, that's really beneficial. In terms of online, it's been interesting, but everyone's sort of working it out now, I think. And yeah, I think I've covered most of the questions there.
Yeah, well, I think the fact that you have time to go surf covers the workload question. For sure. And so we'll move on to the next part, over to rural opportunities now, moving on from curriculum. But before we do that, Sarah, if you can answer Ananya's question, which was, after the first year at Gippsland, do you just come back to Clayton and have classes there?
Yeah, so at Monash, it's a little bit different to other courses because we also have an undergrad stream. So undergrads do a 5-year degree and we do a 4-year degree, and we merge. So postgrad will have 1 preclinical year out in Gippsland, and then the undergrads have 2 preclinical years and they have like an entirely different program, and then we join for their third year. So I've all joined up with them now. So after your first year in Gippsland, you then are officially ready for clinical years. You've already learnt the 2 years that the undergrads have learned. And then from that, you can decide where you want to go do your clinical learning. So you don't actually ever go back to campus or go back to classes or lectures. Everything from there is in hospitals. It's a little bit different so Uni Melb, you get allocated, or you know where your clinical school is and you stay there for the majority of your degree, whereas Monash, each year you can decide to stay at your clinical school each year, or you can swap around. So you could do rural 1 year, or you could go back to the city. So this year I'm at Monash Hospital in Clayton, but a lot of my friends stayed back in Gippsland because they really liked rural, and so they applied to stay there. So we have clinical schools just about everywhere around Melbourne and rural, and so you can decide what you want to do after your first year in Gippsland.
Terrific. That kind of touches on the sort of rural opportunities and whether it's optional or compulsory part. Was there anything you wanted to add about Monash?
Not a huge deal, other than it's compulsory to do the year out in Gippsland as a postgrad, because that's where we do it. So it's about an hour and a half from Melbourne. So it's a good rural exposure, but it's not exactly remote or overly rural. And we would still come back to Melbourne most weekends. We'd have an anatomy lab every, I think, second Friday or third Friday, and we'd come back to Melbourne. So if you aren't super keen on rural, it does give you a nice taste of it, but there's no lock-in, so you don't have to stay rural. You do have to do at least one rotation rural if you don't choose a rural clinical school at all. So me this year coming back to Melbourne, if I stay in Melbourne next year, then I will need to at least do one rotation rural, and they can make sure that you set that up. But if you want, you can stay rural for the rest of the degree as well. So you have options and flexibility. There's also options I think it's a new program that they're starting next year, to opt into their rural end-to-end program. So if you are keen on rural, I think they're doing something more similar to Uni Melb's ERC, which Gabby will tell you about. And so I would go on the site and look that up and see if you're interested in that.
Cool. Rural opportunities at Uni Melb. Gabby, this is your thing. Take it away.
The only thing I know. So rural opportunities are definitely not compulsory at Uni Melb, but in saying that, when you apply at the beginning of the course with what sort of placement area you'd like, there's 2 different metro ones and then a rural one. You put in preferences, and then it's randomized from there. So keep in mind, you may get rural even if you don't put it first, versa, but if you put rural first, you're always going to get rural first. So that's definitely a bonus if that's what you want. And then there's sort of 2 different streams with rural. So there's the rural cohort, and then the ERC, which is extended rural cohort, which I'm in. So the extended rural cohort is made up of about 30 students. And it basically just means that we spend all of our clinical time in rural, but we don't just go to the 4 main rural schools. Our opportunities and sites are sort of opened up a little bit. So instead of having 4 different placement locations, there's about 10 to 15, if I remember correctly, for me to choose from, and which is pretty exciting, and more are being opened up. And if you want to go somewhere particular that isn't sort of on the list as well, I've heard that they are sort of accommodating in that way to try and at least get you to go there for a little bit, if that's what you want. And something that's a bit different there is, so instead of coming back in third year like other rural students will, so they'll come back to Metro and go to one of the hospitals here and do placement largely in the hospital. As ERC, you'll spend most of your time in the GP clinic. There is still opportunities in the hospital, and one thing about rural placements is most of the GPs also work or run the hospitals. So you'll definitely get to sort of experience both of that. So don't think that you sort of will get stuck in a GP clinic. Even though I haven't been, I'm on the Outlook Rural Health Club, and I hear from all of the ERC students that it's actually the best experience ever. So I'm just going to take the time to plug it. And even if you get rural and don't want rural, trust me, you'll love it. So just embrace it. Lots of my friends that have gotten rural that didn't originally want rural or didn't put it at the top of their preference list have loved it. So embrace it and go in with an open mind. Plug over, Eliza.
There you go. That is why she's our rural girl. Next up, we have Tom. There are a lot of different opportunities across states. So what is the rural things at Notre Dame?
Yeah, so this is like pretty relevant, I suppose, because we had to put in our clinical school applications the other day, and this includes applications for rural clinical schools. So Notre Dame has a New South Wales rural clinical school, which includes a few locations, including campuses at Wagga Wagga, Lithgow, there's another one. What is it?
It'll come to you.
Aubrey? No, I can't remember. So there's a few in New South Wales. I can get them up, and then there's also Ballarat in your fourth year in Victoria. So clinical schools at Notre Dame, the rural ones are extremely competitive. Especially Wagga Wagga has about 6 places, the whole cohort. Ballarat has about 12, I think, or maybe 20. So they are quite competitive, given the cohort's about 130. So these places are highly sought after, especially Lithgow, Wagga Wagga, Ballarat, and these other locations. I think the appeal for a lot of people is, I think what Gabby's just saying, Wagga Wagga is a sick town, you should choose that. Yeah, I've heard some great things about Wagga Wagga. And the school is supposed to be fantastic. I think the appeal for a lot of people is you can kind of do a year in your third year or fourth year, and then maybe come back or stay out. I think the flexibility appeals to a lot of people. And there's this kind of idea that you get to do a lot more hands-on, where there's more demand and less workforce. So that's one of the principles behind it as well, is that you're a lot more integral in terms of actually doing stuff and learning stuff, as opposed to kind of maybe being a little bit more of an observer in a metropolitan hospital. There's no compulsory element, but we do rural travel days where we go out to the campuses regardless. And it is a big part of Notre Dame, as envisaged by their multiple campuses. So this year we should have had about 3 visits to each of the different campuses and gone out to the hospitals there and seen all the faculty and the staff. Obviously Rona, so that wasn't a thing. But I think the fact that you can try out rural opportunities, especially given the fact that there are a lot more in New South Wales, there's a lot higher Indigenous population, especially in some of these rural locations. That's something maybe to think about if you're interested in that as well. So yeah, I think that's all I've got to say there.
Terrific. Coming back to Victoria, what are the opportunities like over in Deakin, Matt?
Yep. So as I mentioned before, we well, I guess you could argue as people from Melbourne that anything outside of Melbourne is rural, but Geelong, where the uni actually is, so it's in like the outer suburbs of Geelong. Geelong is a big city, like it's big. So if you do decide to come to Deakin and don't want to do the very outside of Melbourne thing, you can actually just live in a city, Geelong, and it doesn't feel any different to Melbourne. Just less skyscrapers, and you're still like literally a podcast away from probably most houses in Melbourne. Like it's actually like amazingly close, and it's such an easy drive. Me and my sort of mates that I'm living with, we opted to live in Torquay just for the lifestyle of living on the beach, which is yeah, exactly, Liza. That's how I measure my time now. So we're like a little bit further from Melbourne, but 100% worth it. It doesn't really feel like living on the coast isn't rural like you would feel if you went into like the middle of Victoria. It's a bit of a different vibe. But in terms of our course, like there's that rural cohort that I mentioned before, who's you pair off and go sort of like northwest northwest Melbourne for a year and then come back to a clinical school of your choice. There is Warrnambool and Ballarat that are technically, I guess they're probably more regional than rural. Those are options as well, but most people will be based in Geelong for their clinical schools, like clinical school years, which is outside of Melbourne, but again, it's in a big city and it's very close to Melbourne. So don't rule out unis or options because of being afraid of being out of Melbourne, because it's actually can be like the best experience of your life. So that's something very much to keep in mind. Another thing I just thought of, which is actually an option for every, like all uni, like med students, is the John Flynn program. I don't know if any of you guys are actually a part of that or have signed up to it, but it's basically like a way of dipping your toes in rural practice without committing to a rural school at your university. So you can do, it's basically, you have your whole degree to do 6 to 8 weeks of placement time in rural practices. So like I know a mate who went to rural Tasmania for 2 weeks last year, and so he's just going to do 2 weeks in a block each year, or you can just go away at the end of your first year and do 6 weeks bang straight up. So that's something to keep in mind. If you don't want to commit to a rural like clinical school, but you do want to give it a shot, that's something to think about. So the John Flynn program is what it's called.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Matt. And now we'll head over to the next big chunk, which is the extracurricular opportunities, which we're starting off with Sarah. I know she's smiling because this is her thing. She is so down in her extracurriculars.
This is the fun part.
So go off for what all the opportunities that are available.
Yes. So med, I think, is like so good because you're there. So there's so much you can do. And before I did med, I definitely did have a lot of interest in extracurriculars I was involved in, and I traveled a lot and did all of that. The cool thing about med is you can still keep up all of those hobbies. I did find first year was a little bit intense, but I have split up extracurriculars into 4 things. So the first one was Monash specific things. So quite specific to first year Monash particularly, the postgrad sort of vibes being out in Gippsland. Some of these things will transfer over to like Deakin or Notre Dame if you're living together. But basically first year postgrad at Monash is awesome because there's 100 of you, a very small cohort. It sounds big, but it's really not, living in this tiny place. We live in Churchill, which has a population of I think like 4,000, and most of those are uni students. So we all live together and it's literally just so fun. And so what we would do is we live on site at the medical school. And so after class, everyone would go to like the gym together, go to the pool together. We would do like yoga at the pool. I can't really explain it, like floating yoga. So we did that every day after class, or we would do other things together after class, have volleyball tournaments, wine tours, laser tag, literally anything that we could think of. We brought a petting zoo out. Like, we just made it really fun for the year, and it's a really good chance to get to know each other. So there's the fun side, and then there's also, I guess, the opportunity to grow and upskill and like invest in what your passions are. So there is like 1,001 different clubs and things that you can join, both as part of your med societies in terms of like your internal med societies as part of your university, and also as part of bigger med societies. So it's something that's really cool and different about med is AMSA and similar organizations which cover more than one medical school. So AMSA is the biggest one. It covers all of the medical schools in Australia and provides events for all of them, and you can get to know people from other med schools and what they're doing, and you can have roles there as well. So if you like policy, you like public health, or you like sort of bringing in policy and advocacy, then you can become involved in that. Or if you like events management, or if you like executive positions, you can get involved in all of those. So there's heaps of opportunities with that, and they run 4 events a year, and they focus on different parts of health as well. So you can have sort of more your health related things, and then you can have more like fun party related things. And the other one I think Matt already mentioned was John Flynn, and that's more of like an academic related extracurricular in that you can go and do extra rural placements over the summer, which I did last year and I'll keep doing for the next couple of years, and it's really worth it, really fun. So basically there are so many extracurricular opportunities, and yeah, I think that it's about finding something that's good for you. But I guess now it's not like you need to think about this so much now, but just know that like med isn't all boring and looking into the books, that you can find a lot of joy and passions and fun and like carve your way through medical school outside of the curriculum, which is really cool.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. And then anything specific to uni Mel, Gab?
Yeah, so as Sarah said, there's lots of different clubs. That's definitely one thing that I noticed straight into med. Like all of my friends and I are in different clubs, and there's a real opportunity to be a part of that and be in leadership roles. But one thing that I think is sort of extracurricular, but it's also sort of within our curriculum at Uni Melb, is we have a med school conference every year, which is, we had it online this year, which was definitely an experience. And it's basically just focused around workshops and things like that, and talks to sort of help with your academic development as well as professional development. And it's a way for you to interact with other students from year groups and staff members within their sort of specific profession and field, which is really interesting. Like I got to go to a gynecology workshop via Zoom, which was really interesting, and I really loved it. And as a MD student, that's sort of like a great hands-on experience, even though it was via Zoom, still really hands-on experience. So in terms of extracurricular that really stands out from other unis, I'd say the med school conference, and there's heaps online, so read up about that if you want more information.
Awesome. Tom?
Yeah, so Notre Dame has the student society, the medical student society called Mandus, and Mandus is I would almost describe as top heavy. I reckon probably more than half the cohort is in some form of the society through one of the clubs. So if that doesn't speak for itself, I'm not really sure how to describe it. But there's everything from UND Fem, which is about quality of medicine, to the sustainable health, to there's the surgical society, there's the run club, which I love as well, and there's the rounds, the rural club. There's the AMSA, all that sort of stuff. There's Global Hands, which is about kind of international like outreach and development and health. There is just so many under this kind of, if you look up Notre Dame Mandus, I think you're probably better off reading about it than I am trying to explain it. But there is just a huge amount of opportunity to find kind of some sort of alleyway that you really enjoy and to get involved. There are so many opportunities in that regard. Notre Dame's really big into their extracurricular activities. There's lots of social events. They really try to build a sense of rapport, especially between the year levels as well. When we started class, the first few weeks, every Friday afternoon, we'd go to like the local pub just down the road with all the second years, and everyone would just mingle and meet and get to know each other, which I think is really, really cool. It just feels like a really great environment. Everyone's really friendly, and because you have so many people from different backgrounds who have started companies or run businesses or had kids or done all sorts of different walks of life, I think you get a really interesting mix when you put them all together. So you're bound to have great extracurricular opportunities. So yeah, I think if you want to know more about that, just jump online and look up Mandus and you can see how much is available there.
Awesome. And Deakin with Matt?
Deakin is pretty similar in this aspect, I think. So like no matter what your interest is, you can find a club for it, regardless like of whether it's in, like there's all the medicine clubs. You can also still just join all of the other clubs that are like in your normal O-week sort of setups as well. I'm sure that's the same at these other unis too. So if you have interests in clubs that you've been sort of pursuing in your undergrad, I'm sure you can manage to continue that in postgrad medicine wherever you go. So there's a huge amount of options, social events as well that have sort of been a bit interrupted this year, but still like a lot of opportunities to meet people, play sports if you want to. There's some like social netball and basketball competitions that go on at the campus. And then there's also like a few clubs that will run various trips as well, including like your more academically oriented international placement-y kind of trips, to just like surfing trips and snowboard trips and stuff like that. So yeah, if you have an interest in anything, you can find a club for it and pursue that, which is really cool.
Awesome. Deaf's your jam. For this next section, we'll stick to a minute response from everyone. So for Sarah, this is all about perspective. What is something that you know now about med school that you didn't know before starting med school? And then also, what was the hardest part of getting into med school and then starting? The 2 questions.
Yeah. So something that I wish I knew before medical school was that I needed to overcome my perfectionism, and that you can never know everything in med. I know it sounds obvious, but you just can't. And a lot of you are probably like, oh, I'm not that perfectionistic, but most of you probably are, and definitely worth putting it aside because you can't know everything. Sorry, what was the next question?
What was the hardest part of getting into med school?
Hardest part of getting into med school was the confidence battle and just feeling like I wasn't good enough, wasn't going to get there. And it was definitely detrimental to my mental health. And I wish I hadn't done that to myself because it wasn't necessary. And I believe that you can get there. So yeah, work hard, you can get there. The confidence battle.
Awesome. Gab, the quick one too, if you can remember what the questions are.
Yeah, I can actually merge them into 2 because I think I'm still learning, and it's coming off of that sort of confidence thing. I struggled with confidence right in year 12, didn't think I was going to get in, so just gave up straight away. And then through the whole med application process, and still now, like even when I'm in a tute group, I struggle to sort of say I know the answer or give sort of insight into topics. And that's something that you really need in medical school. You need to be confident and to be able to put yourself out there, to volunteer for things, and to say your opinion and to ask questions. And it's this idea of imposter syndrome, and it's real. And I sort of always said it was real, but I didn't realize how real it was until getting into med. So I wish I sort of prepared for that a little bit more, but it's also a good learning curve now to continue to sort of build on those confidence skills.
Tom, you're next.
Yeah, just getting off mute. So I think for everyone here, I still think of myself more of like a biomed student, than I do, who was just going into Monash, going into the Menzies building and doing a little like arts tute than I do a med student. So I really, I think take solace in the fact that by the time you get to the end of the degree, everyone's working hard and everything works out. So I think the best thing for me has been kind of breaking down how built up it is, because I think I don't think it's the end of the world, and I think it is quite achievable for everyone who's working hard. And I will attest to the fact that so something I now know about med school that I didn't know before. I think it, as dumb as it sounds, it's like how much the content that I thought in biomed was really dumb and really niche and not necessary is necessary and is relevant. And I think that's been a little bit, that's been frustrating because sometimes I'm like, oh, when you're in, I think something to think about is when I was kind of in biomed, it was like, this was a means to an end to get into med. And so I think something that's really important to think about is if you really love, make sure you really love that or you're really passionate about that, because obviously at the same time, once you start going to clinical, it's all different. But at the end of the day, this is the basis of things as well. So I think that's been a bit of a learning curve for me, and I definitely attest to the fact that I also experienced this imposter syndrome. I still feel like, what am I doing? It's been barely a year, so I won't sit here act as if I've got it figured out. But I think once you start to, like Gabby was saying as well, once you start to just process it a little bit and just break it down, I think it's a very, very achievable process. And I think you start to really love it once you apply yourself and you realize that you're not just fighting through, you're not fighting, competing with everyone to try and get in. Suddenly you can actually think about what you're doing and just applying it and working towards more of an idea of a career. So yeah, I hope that kind of helps. I know it's a bit of a rant.
Good Tom rant. And Matt.
So I can very much relate to everything that these guys have said already. And that's, it's quite real for all's about the sort of the stuff that you didn't want it to be relevant, but it turns out being important. You're like, damn.
What's an example of that? Curiosity. What's an example of a niche learning?
Look, I really was immunology, it's not my thing. Turns out that's so important in medicine. It's like, and it sounds stupid because you'd be like, well, yeah, sort of obviously, but it's kind of things like that the level of detail you need is not sort of what you expect it's going to be. What I sort of wished I think I had heard this, but I didn't really believe it, that medicine doesn't need to be your entire life, whether it be at in a postgrad university course setting or past that and down your track. It doesn't need to be, and it actually really shouldn't be. You need to have other things outside of medicine. They've sort of, research is really coming out now about the crazy burnout level and mental health issues that are present in doctoring in general around the world. So it's really important for I think for whether you're in medicine school, medical school, before getting into medical school or after, it's really important that you're trying to find a balance in your life, doing the things you really enjoy outside of uni and not sacrificing those, because those are some of the really important parts of your life, and if you value them, really get into them, and look after yourself. I think that sort of ties into the hardest part of getting into medical school for me. I think I can relate to what some of these guys have said in terms of my mental health, suffering a fair bit from just the stress and it's easy to become it's easy for it to be a very all-consuming kind of thing, and while it's challenging, it again just really sort of get around the things that you enjoy that aren't medicine as well. Follow your interests and stuff, and look after yourself, because that's you, to treat people and help people be healthy. You need to be healthy yourself.
For sure. I think that lends that self perfectly for the last little bit, which is, what is your one last piece of advice for students who are now applying to get into med school? We'll start off with Sarah and just go straight off the bat together.
Wow, this is a huge one. I think it comes down to don't lose yourself in the process of getting into med, because when you are there, you will be so grateful and it will be like the doors have opened for you. But if you have no reserves left because you have spent it all in your efforts to get in, then you will just be so burnt out and so exhausted that all of these things will still be problematic for you. So biggest advice I can give is just enjoy the process of wherever you're at now. Medical school will happen when medical school is meant to happen for you. For me, I had to defer my med offer twice because of personal reasons, and in a way that enabled me to make sure I didn't lose myself before the difficulties of med that were surely to come. So still just enjoy the process and don't wish for the time when med arrives, because it will happen when it happens for you, and there's still awesome things in life besides med.
Good advice, Sarah. Mine's a bit of practical advice, and it's to learn how to reach out and ask for help. That's relevant in the process where you're applying for medicine. So asking for help in terms of applications, interview prep, things like that. Ask people for help, because most of the time people will help you, whether they're in the medical field or not. People want to help you and want to see you succeed. So learn how to ask for help, and be okay with asking for help and being put in that vulnerable position where you're saying, you know, I need help. It's something I'm still learning, and I think part of that is the sort of confidence, like we were talking about, to be able to ask for help and put your hand up, and just coming off of that, believing in yourself. You can do it and you will do it. And like Sarah said, medical school will come. It's not the be all and end all. If you have an interest in this area, it will come to you in one way or another. So keep at it. And yeah, don't stop believing in yourself, and don't lose touch.
Yeah, I think Sarah and Gabby have just nailed it there. Sarah, with the part of if it's you who would like to be, you know, who would like to go into medical school, why would you change your personality when it comes to interviews and the application process? At the end of the day, you want people to see if you think you should be there, then I think you should really make sure that at the end of the day you show yourself. And because I know a lot of people who get very sucked into really kind of practicing and rehearsing responses to the interviews and stuff like that. And I think it's very easy to lose who you are for the sake of, you know, what people have said works. So at the end of the day, just be yourself and trust in the fact that yourself is good enough. And yeah, I think I agree with the point that Gabby was saying as well. Just use everyone, you know, reach out to all your contacts. Don't use them, obviously, but honestly, I think the people who you have relationships with, I think it's worth reaching out to everyone. And like Gabby's saying, everyone wants to help you. And I know I did that a lot. I got all the advice I could, got all the input I could. At the end of the day, I still stuck with my own sort of voice. Yeah, your connections, yeah. You know, at the end of the day, I still stuck with my own voice, and I still stuck to what I believed was right, or what I believed was how I wanted to respond to things. But I used as much advice as I could. And so I'd say don't be shy away from letting people help you as well. Yeah, I feel like there's at the end of the day, a really important thing to remember is there's no hard and fast method. Everyone's got their own way of getting in. So don't feel as though you need to do what other people are doing. Really just stick to your own guns, and best of luck.
Huge advice from all of these guys. I cannot agree more with what's been said. And I kind of wish I'd heard some of this before I tried to get into medicine myself. In terms of adding on to that, yeah, I'd say, again, look after yourself. Can't stress that enough. You want to come out of this happy and in one piece. And again, yeah, it will happen for you at some point. I like, particularly in my experience with Deakin, is there's people that have come from all over the place to get into the course. Some of my best mates are late 20s, early 30s, and are having a ripper time. And I don't think they would change the way they've gone about things and been taking a bit more time to get to the point where they are now. And that gives them massive strengths as well that other people don't have. So yeah, everyone has different strengths. So even if you may not be doing as well as you'd like academically, don't get caught up in comparing yourself to other people, particularly in really high achieving environments like your biomed undergrad degrees and stuff like that. Exactly what Tom said, everyone's got a different way of going about it and doing their own thing. So yeah, don't be disheartened. Everyone's good at different things. You might have amazing communication skills. You might have amazing critical thinking skills. You might be super good at science. Yeah, just really can't sort of emphasize enough to not be disheartened by sort of comparing yourself to what you think you should be or should be doing. So any school just to finish off, any school you go to, you're going to have a good time. So it's up to you to throw yourself into the process and into the experience. So yeah,
For
Best of
sure.
luck, everybody.
Thank you so much for capping that off. And I can say on behalf of everyone, thank you so much, Sarah, Gabby, Matt, and Tom, for taking the time to be able to share those insights and your experience and your journey with us. Luke just asked, what is the most difficult interview question each of you received that still haunts you? Actually, does anyone actually have an answer to that, or do you want me to continue? Anyone have a genuine answer to that? Sarah does. Okay, Sarah, you can answer it.
Sorry, I do have one that haunts me, which was just so niche and specific that I was like, what? It was it was at the Monash interviews, and they asked me, do I think that breast milk transplantation should be made legal and that we should donate our breast milk to third world countries? And I'd never heard of it before. This was 5 years ago, and it wasn't really a thing that had been around yet. And I was like, what? So yeah, that still haunts me, but I think I dealt with it fine. I don't really remember how I dealt with it though, but yeah, definitely still haunts me.
It's still probably triggered. I asked you the other day, is breast milk vegan? And I had a whole rant about it.
Yeah, rip. The real reason I'm vegan.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys. And if you guys got something out of that session and got some inspo from these four, please do let them know what you did learn and what you did take away from this session. I know that everyone loves reading that in the chat. And whilst you do write that in the chat, I just want to quickly show you 3 things in particular, because we do know that, running a lot of students who are taking the GAMSAT and obviously applying for med right now, they've been asking for some more resources and help to try and go through that application process, which can be really arduous and painful. And as you can see, the interviews can be very haunting and PTSD-like. So we have 3 things in particular that I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew about. The first of which, and we've been relentlessly inside joking this about the podcast, but like it genuinely is a really good resource. We've already had 500 students download this, which is amazing. But as you can see, literally on the podcast, it's both on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and also our YouTube. Every week we have an episode on something related in the health niche area, which you could potentially get as a PTSD interview MMI station, just like Sarah did. So it's things you probably haven't really thought about, or if you're Googling stuff, are not going to probably come up. And so we've made that into each episode for you. So for instance, like climate crisis and food waste, sometimes we don't really know how that ties into the health profession. But if you have a look here, there's also, we've started a new season where, look, it's Tom, but we've also recorded a new season where we have behind the scenes of a station, and you literally get to hear a student have a go at a specific station that could be coming up in the MMI. So I would definitely use that resource if you are going to be preparing right now, and it's totally open source. You can just find it on Spotify just like this. Also, if you have not registered yet, please register for the this Saturday we have the Med Interview Master Skills Workshop. We've done this before and it turned out really, really well for students, and they said they wanted to do it again. So generally what we do in the first 45 minutes is go through some broader concepts. I think in this specific one that we're going through on Saturday, it's more about having a structure but not a rehearsed response. And then we literally live breakout room you with our examiners, which by the way, Gabby, Sarah, Matt, and Tom are all examiners, and there are a whole ton more, and you get a live experience to be able to have a go at that MMI station and get some live feedback, which will hopefully help and catapult you to be able to make some progress there. And if you're really getting into that time of your timeline, getting a bit serious about the interview prep phase, we do have mock rounds coming up where you can sit a full 8-station circuit and get full feedback on each of your performances and how you could improve for the actual day and get the most out of that. And if you don't know where all these links are, it is all on the Halad to Health Australia Facebook page, so you can catch all the notifications there, and we update that live all the time. So with that to end off with, thank you so much, everyone. And we will see you hopefully very, very soon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Good luck with it all.
Cool.